Greetings all, and welcome to the 32nd episode of the V.T.P, or the Veteran Trainer's Perspective. Today, we're going to be discussing a topic that may or may not be all that controversial for some to discuss, depending on your views of what makes Pokemon and humans in any way distinct from each other. Yes, indeed, we are going to be taking a brief look into Pokemon-Human relationships with a specific nod towards relationships that go beyond the loving care that most trainers would give, and whether there is a biological basis for the sustainability of such relationships in developing a society.
Since we live in a time on this viewing platform where even the slightest misstep in language can prove to be a serious error, I want to be discreet in today's brief discussion and address the elephant in the room that, yes, sometimes people in Pokemon go beyond the normal boundaries that societal norms might dictate and engage in romantic relationships with one another. This is something that has been known for a while, and given that I am a part of this group, I can understand both sides of the coin when it comes to approaching this somewhat taboo topic. However, its taboo nature is honestly something that only has truly arisen in modern times, as it is commonly known that books within the Canalave City Library of the Sinnoh region make it perfectly clear that in ancient times, there wasn't a hard line to define a boundary between humans and Pokemon. They were seen as one and the same to each other, so it was quite common for them to marry each other and likely engage in intense romantic relationships as a result. It's only in more recent eras that this has been seen as improper and possibly even illegal, and that's just how things have managed to develop over all that time between the past and the present.
However, this is not to say that much of this has died out in any form. No, just as with alcohol during Prohibition over here in the United States, it's something that has been still going on ever since, just more so locked behind some closed doors.
The good news to that is that very recent times have started to modernize and make the practice acceptable again in the eyes of many, but this is not to say that everyone is on board with it. Just as with any controversial issue, there are still sides to it all, from how Pokemon is seen as animals by some and thus seen this as sort of an act of akin to bestiality, to those that take it to the extreme opposite end and believe that there should be no restrictions on taste in this fashion. To be honest, I don't really want to get into an in-depth discussion on which side is right or wrong, or even what pros and cons could be seen with either side. Instead, I'd like to take a moment to briefly speak on the more biological aspect of all of this. In essence, I'd mainly like to take a look as to whether or not there is a biological basis for whether or not these sorts of relationships could actually work from the perspective of growing and maintaining society.
In order to do that, however, we need to be able to determine if it is even possible for humans to actually invest in procreation with Pokemon, as any civilization really can't grow unless it is possible for its population to grow steadily as well.
For that to take place, we need to set a hard definition of where humans and Pokemon stand in terms of genetics and species identity. Now, there are some like MatPat of game theory who have already jumped the gun on this note and have made it quite clear that they believe that humans are Pokemon too, and thus should have some sort of breeding capabilities to them. But I wouldn't be so fast to jump to that conclusion. The truth of the matter is that humans are not Pokemon at all, and for me, that reality comes down to the simple fact that Pokemon, regardless of their form, shape, or if they are even living creatures at all, are all unified by one principal attribute. They can be caught in capture devices. Humans, on the other hand, well, really can't, outside of some science fiction movies that might otherwise suggest we could in the future. On that note alone, we cannot simply assume that the two groups could breed together in any capacity, so let's first take a look at what we can tell on the Pokemon side of the issue that might give us a better look at the needed parameters for viable offspring to be generated.
Egg groups make the biggest initial difference for us to be looking into anything that could potentially be compatible with humans, and while there are plenty of them to choose from, there are two in particular that I think are of great interest here, namely the human-like and amorphous egg groups.
The name given to the former group is a bit self-explanatory, but for the sake of establishing parameters for compatibility, this group is defined by creatures that can be fully bipedal in their movements, never needing to go on all fours to get around. This sort of bipedal humanoid silhouette is critical for establishing possible mating parties, as bipedalism is a unique mode of locomotion that is actually far less common in the real world than some might otherwise assume, with primates being the only real order known that can strongly feature this trait. However, there are some wrinkles here that prevent us from assuming that all or any Pokemon in this group are actually able to breed with humans, because all primates in this group are mammals, and all the Pokemon in the human-like egg group, well, are not. However, it does clue us in that this sort of trait in the Pokemon world has developed in many groups via convergent evolution, and it seems to serve them quite well in this function. As for the amorphous egg group, these creatures tend to take on unusual forms that strict biological standards can't really address, but this flexibility in form means that they can take on shapes that might otherwise be impossible for them in normal circumstances, and this applies to their genetic material as well, in turn opening up the possibility for compatibility issues to be bypassed if the genome is flexible enough to accommodate the genetic material of other life forms with little issue.
On the opposite side of the equation, we have the human race next to consider, and whether or not we have the genetic flexibility to make offspring with something that doesn't share our species.
Under most cases, this really just doesn't work. Species are independent breeding populations for a reason, and are normally only compatible with their own kind by design. With that said, though, it has been seen that it is possible to actually take different animal species and breed them together if they are close enough to each other regarding their genetics, such as sharing the same genus. A classic example would be a mule, which is created from a female horse and a male donkey, and in many cases, these sorts of creatures tend to inherit biological traits from both sides of the coin, potentially getting attributes that otherwise would not be seen in one animal. As a consequence, though, this often ends up creating an organism that is sterile and unable to create its own breeding population in any fashion. Still, this could be seen as a way to nonetheless increase population numbers and thus build up a society, so it would still be a viable mark for a successful population in larger groups. And on this note, the human race has already gone beyond just that in our own genetic history. While it might not be apparent to most offhand, many recent studies have shown that humans have already bypassed the sterility issue in ancient times, as it is known that humans likely mated with Neanderthals, as clear evidence of the genetic material is present in our own, to the point where one of the leading hypotheses for explaining their eventual extinction is that our species bred them out of existence. This has yet to be fully proven, but the evidence for it is compelling and shows that we as a species not only have the potential to hybridize with different related species, but can create offspring that are still viable for reproduction as well.
So now we have a few basic parameters we can go by with Pokemon, and have certain evidence that the human race as we know it does have the capacity to breed with different species. With these parameters set, we can now finally narrow our search and see if there is a party that would likely fit the mold best as the most viable evidence of human beings being able to reproduce with Pokemon.
And in fact, there is one family in particular that stands above the rest as perhaps the most viable of all, and that would be... Well folks, the internet beat me to this one long ago. The Ralts family. Yeah, honestly, this should have been apparent from the get-go, and while they might not have the exact same anatomy as us, they have a unique combination of egg groups that makes their viability quite strong, as they're not only part of the human-like egg group, but the amorphous egg group as well, and are the only Pokemon that are in both of these groups. This is critical because while the mammalian forms might not resemble humans closely outside of their general shape and locomotion, the addition of the amorphous egg group means that their genetics are flexible, and that makes them much more viable than any others out there. This is not to say that there aren't others out there that could also be potentially viable, and that right there is the main aspect I would like to point out here. The members of the Ralts family are by far the best when it comes to compatibility potential, but others like the members of the Drowsy and Smoochum families have potential as well, especially given that they share strikingly similar hand anatomy compared to our own species, as the arrangement of 4 fingers and an opposable thumb is a core identification marker for apes, the exclusive group of primates that our species belongs to. As such, I think that from a biological standpoint, it is quite possible that humans and certain types of Pokemon can interbreed and produce viable offspring.
However, there is a bit of a snag to all this that likely will come to the minds of any and all that give it any degree of serious thought. If we can produce offspring with at least some types of Pokemon, why don't we see supposed hybrids walking around today in great numbers in at least some locations?
Well, I can attribute that to 2 likely outcomes. The simplest very much harkens back to the idea that humans may have bred our relatives in the Neanderthals out of existence. They likely exist as part of genome, but their core characteristics have likely become so diluted over time that they have just become a part of the human race as we know it, which means anatomical differences have likely become minor enough that we couldn't tell the difference outside of simple physiology. The second, though, is also where Mina and I would like to transition into just a brief mentioning of the culture of this debacle. Human perception of the act and the rights of the parents.
To be blunt, the idea of being able to make hybrids of humans and Pokemon might sound interesting on paper, but if it comes to that, then how exactly are the parents treated on both ends of the aisle? Are all Pokemon just animals that don't need to be afforded the same level of rights that other creatures do? Do all of them deserve to be treated with human rights? Or do only some of them do? This is a sticky societal web that really isn't Hubby's specialty, and thus he can't give a great deal of professional comment on it, but I also don't think he needs to given the circumstances. in the real world, this issue with fair treatment is a struggle for many societies when it comes to foreigners, especially of different skin tones, cultures, languages, etc., and is a hot topic issue even to this very day because of the systematic nature of these issues. And what is really being done to address and potentially tackle these issues? Well, if you haven't noticed in the news, humans can barely handle the idea of fair treatment within our own species. So how can they hope to be able to tackle this issue with species that are different from their own? No matter the era of modern times, giving fair rights to all sadly doesn't seem like something that can be tackled at the moment by major world powers. But that doesn't mean that it's an issue that can be swept under the rug.
I can, however, at least offer some words to the scientific community and the public at large when it comes to these sorts of human and Pokemon relationships and what they should mean to those involved in this activity. Go with your heart.
I know that might sound a bit cheesy, but that's sort of where I want to end this brief discussion of the topic. Not with science, but with heart. Look, I've been with Mina for years now, and as much as she does her best to look and act human, we are aware of what she is, and we honestly don't care. I don't know if I would be the one to really say that she has the same rights as any other human, but she's also the one true love of my life in here, and I've done everything to make sure that she will always have freedom. Has anyone ever noticed the gold band around her neck? That choker actually has a jamming device inside of it that disables empty capture devices within 10 feet of her in any direction, so she can essentially never be captured and thus can live her life freely. I wanted to make sure of that because to me, she is a person. And though not the same species, she deserves the same rights that I have as a human being in modern society as far as I'm concerned.
I didn't even make that choice. Mina asserted it herself, and I followed through because I love her dearly. We got our kids from all this, and while I can't say that humans and Pheromosa are supposed to be compatible in any way, we managed to make it work with our 3 children. I can't fully believe that their lives won't be easy because of the taboo nature of our relationship, but at the very least, I will say that on a case-by-case basis, it's up to people and their partners to make their choice on where they wish to take things. So long as it truly doesn't hurt themselves or the public, I say go for it, and embrace what makes your connection special. If nature wills it to happen, and it happens, be one with it, and live your life with a full heart, no matter who it may be with.
Hubby is right. If you truly do love someone, don't be ashamed of it. It happens to a lot of people, even if it might not seem proper, but we can be more than just partners. Friends, family, lovers, mothers and fathers. We all have our own choices in life to make, and we might not always know where they will lead us, but that just means that we all have the choice to assert our rights and our interests just as much as any human being would. We all want to be accepted for who and what we are. If that means wanting to be on the same level as humans in society, then so be it, I say. If you can make kids, sure, and if not, okay. Either way, while hubby makes a point that it can't happen, I make my own point with him that if it could happen, it does happen. Don't let cultural norms get in the way of it. When the love is mutual, embrace it, as no judgment should come if there is truly a connection between a human and a Pokemon that transcends what societal norms would otherwise wish to dictate.
With that, I thank you all for tuning in, and keep your eyes peeled for the next episode of the V.T.P. Thank you for watching this video. It brings me great joy to be able to speak to you all in the world each and every time we meet like this, to explore the many different facets of both the world of Pokemon as we know it, and the world as we live it, through every adventure we have with Pokemon by our side. If you'd like to, please subscribe, ring the bell and all that jazz, to keep yourself updated on content uploads and other materials of the like. You can also follow me on Twitter if you'd like to know right away when something new is uploaded, and my written works, from which most of this is based on, can be found on DeviantArt. Links to both can be found in the description down below. Remember that the world of Pokemon is a place full of wonder and mystery, and you never know what to expect. So, stay vigilant, keep watch, and always be prepared for the unexpected. Until next time, trainers and friends of all sorts, have a wonderful time.